Welcome back. In the previous step, we established one-to-one relationship between the student and his passport. Let's get started now. What I would want to start with is creating a repository for the student. So right now we only created the entity for student. We don't really have the repository for it. So let's copy the course repository and call it student repository. And what I will also do is Control F at find, Control F or Command F, find, replace. So I would want to find course and replace it with student. Be careful with the case. So capital course, capital student, and I'm using a case sensitive replace. So be very careful. I don't want to replace the variable names. I only want to replace the class names. So let's go ahead and do that. Replace all. You'd see that all the classes are replaced now. Next, I'll replace the variables as well. Course with student. Now you can see small course, small student, replace all. Control Shift O to organize your imports. And now you're all set. You see how easy it was to migrate from student repository, from the course repository to the student repository. A lot of the code which we write with entity manager is the same irrespective of the entity we are trying to manage. All that would be changing would be the class name, the variable names, and things like that. We would discuss this a lot more when we talk about Spring Data JPA, but for now, let's live with the entity manager and use it to create a student. What we want to save is a student down. So we would want to save a student down. So when I get a student, what I would get along with it is a passport. So let's create a separate method. I'll call this save student with passport. So I would want to create a passport. I would want to create a student, and I would want to save the student down. So let's start with that. Passport is equal to new passport of, let's take a number. Let's start with Z, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've created a passport. Now I would go ahead and create a student as well. So student, we have it here. So I'll remove all the stuff after this. I don't need the student 2 stuff. So let's remove this out. I'll call this new student of Mike, and I would persist student 1. So we are creating a passport, we are creating a student, and I'm trying to persist the student. Will this save the passport? Will this save the passport and map it to the student? It will not, because we have not established the relationship between the student and the passport. We need to say student.set passport. However, we forgot one important thing. There is no getter and setter for passport. So let's go ahead and create that in here. So I'll go here and say Alt Shift S, generate getters and setters, and I would say generate passport getters and setters. So this would enable us to get the passport details of a student and set the passport details as well. So let's try and save it right now. So passport is equal to new passport, student is equal to new student of Mike, student dot set passport, and entity manager dot persist student. So will this work? Let's check it out. Let's call this from our runner. So we have the demo application. So let's go there. We'll change the course repository. Instead of course repository, I would want to use the student repository. So I'll say student repository. And because we have now 2 repositories, I would need to make it explicit which one is which. So course repository, student repository, and let's go further down and now start playing with our student repository. Student repository, oops, it's not recognizing the student repository. Organize imports, and student repository dot save student with passport. So for now, we are hard coding values. That's not really a problem. So what we are trying to do is save the student down with a passport details. Will this work? Think about it. I'll start the application in the meanwhile. When I started the application, what I see is an exception. It's saying transient property value exception. It's saying passport is transient. Passport has not yet been saved to the database. So you are setting a passport to the student, but the passport is not yet in the database. If the passport is not yet in the database, how do you create a relationship with it? So let's go ahead and fix that. So entity manager dot persist passport. So first we persist the passport, then we create a student, establish the relationship with the passport, and persist the student. This is the right order of steps when we talk about one-to-one relationships. The student is the owning side of the relationship because it contains the passport ID. So before we are able to create a student, we should create the passport. So we create the passport, create an ID for it, then we go into creating the student. So what I'll do now is I'll put this into debug mode so that we can look at what's happening in the background. So let's start in debug mode, demo application. I would want to use the debug perspective, please. Okay, cool. So now we are in the debug perspective. We are at the place where we are creating the passport. So I'll do a function F6 and it's now trying to create the passport. So what I'll do is I'll clear out the console. Let's look at console in detail. So I'll move it a little bit up so that we can clearly see what's happening. Function F6 again. You can see that em.persist passport. So it actually created a sequence. So it called the Hibernate sequence, and you can see that the ID of the passport is now assigned. So it has an ID. What is the ID of the passport? 1. So passport has an ID. Now what would happen when I do this? Function F6 again. Student is created. I'll clear the console again. Student.set passport, nothing goes to the database. Now we are trying to persist the student. So what would happen whenever I try to persist the student? Again, the next value for Hibernate sequence is called. At the end of the transaction is when Hibernate would send all the database changes down to the database. So we have the student ID, we have the passport ID. When I press function F8, you'd see that all the next steps would happen. You'd see that insert into passport number comma ID. So a row is inserted into passport with an ID 1. So a new row is created in passport with an ID 1, and a new row is created in student with name as Mike, passport ID as 1. This is the student ID, right? This student ID is 2. So we have now created a relationship between the student and the passport as well. So now I can go to the console, refresh the page, connect, and I'm running the select start from passport. Here is the new passport that we have created in 1 Z123456. And if I go to the student, what would I see? I would see select start from student. I'm seeing Mike. What is the passport ID of Mike? 1. So ID is 2. So now if I join the tables, select start from student comma passport, where student.id, student.passport ID is equal to passport.id. Let's do this. Now you'd see the entire row for Mike. Mike with a passport of Z123456 is now in the database. The student details are in the student table, the passport is created, and the relationship is created through the column passport ID within the student table. So we have successfully inserted a new student with a passport with a one-to-one relationship present. Let's end this step here, and I'll see you in the next step.